Long before Athens ruled the sea, the land to the south, near Laurion, carried a different kind of promise. People learned to read the hills for signs, odd-coloured rock, heavy fragments, veins that did not belong. They tested what they found by breaking it, heating it, watching for metal where ordinary stone gave nothing back. Word spread fast. Silver did not just shine, silver paid. At first, the work stayed small and close to the surface. Men followed exposed seams, prying ore out where the rock gave way, then digging where it did not. Each new find pushed them deeper by degrees. The hills began to change, not through one grand project, but through many quick decisions repeated again and again. A shallow cut became a pit became a shaft. Those first shafts marked a turning point. Once digging went underground, mining stopped being an occasional gamble and became a planned effort that demanded tools, timber, and steady hands. Ore had to be moved, sorted, and kept from being stolen. People started counting what came out and what it cost to get it. The ground itself set the pace, and the silver seams kept pulling them onward. Demand for silver rose, and the old way of mining no longer kept up. Small teams and seasonal labour did not produce enough ore, not fast enough. So Athenians turned to a system that delivered steady bodies every day in any weather. Enslaved people were purchased, transported, and assigned to the mines as property. Production became predictable. The cost was pushed onto human lives. Once slavery anchored the workforce, Laurion changed shape. Mining stopped being a scattered effort and became a coordinated enterprise. More shafts were cut, more pits opened. Work no longer waited for volunteers or wages. Owners and contractors could plan months ahead because the labour could not walk away. The mines expanded to match the appetite for ore, and captivity made that expansion possible. This new scale required a new kind of organisation. Groups of enslaved workers were gathered in large numbers, rented out, or held by wealthy owners as an investment that generated output. The system rewarded those who could buy more people and drive more extraction. Laurion became an industrial landscape in all but name. The engine was silver, the fuel was coerced human labour. The mines did not just spread across the surface, they pushed down. Shafts sank deeper and tunnels branched out like roots, chasing the richest seams. That change forced a new kind of order. One person no longer did everything. Some cut into the rock hour after hour, in spaces too tight to stand. Others followed, clearing rubble before it buried the passage. Underground work became a system, and every body had a single purpose. Once the ore broke free, it still had to move. Haulers carried loads through low corridors, in repeated trips that never seemed to end. The weight strained backs and crushed fingers when footing slipped. Above ground, other enslaved workers washed the ore, separating useful metal from waste by constant stirring and sorting. It sounded simpler than digging, but it meant cold water, raw skin, and fine grit that entered the mouth and lungs with every breath. Then came the heat. Smelters fed furnaces and managed flows of molten metal, turning prepared ore into silver-bearing lead that could be refined again. It demanded attention, timing, and strength, and mistakes burned flesh fast. Across every job, the danger changed shape, but never left. Darkness became a routine, dust became a companion, injury became expected. Specialization made the mines more productive, and it also trapped enslaved workers inside a deadly rhythm that repeated until bodies failed. As more money depended on steady silver, owners and contractors stopped treating the mines like rough ventures and started running them like controlled systems. Overseers appeared as a constant presence, not an occasional check. They measured output, pushed the pace, and watched for any pause that looked like resistance. Work became less about skill and more about obedience. The mines did not just take strength, they demanded submission, hour after hour, without negotiation. To enforce that submission, punishment became routine and public. Beatings, withholding food, and deliberate exhaustion sent a clear message through the workforce: slow down, and pain followed. Injuries stopped being an accident and started becoming part of management. Contractors treated bodies as replaceable units because the system brought in more captives whenever it needed them. The result was simple. Fear did what persuasion never could, and production kept moving. Escape also became harder. Movement was restricted, workers were kept under closer watch, and confinement turned the mining zone into a trap as much as a workplace. The more control tightened, the rarer flight became, and the risks of trying rose sharply. Laurion turned into a place where a life got spent like fuel, burned up to keep furnaces fed and accounts balanced. The mines kept their silver, they kept their people too. Then the numbers changed. More ore came up, more silver came out, and the money did not trickle in. It surged. What had once been counted as a string of private profits now landed like a public event. Officials saw it in the taxes, the fees, the steady stream moving toward the city's accounts. The mines stopped looking like distant businesses. They started looking like a lever of power. That shift mattered because it changed who felt entitled to decide what the silver meant. Public administrators began to measure Laurion in terms of state needs, not individual gain. Records, inspections, and rules tightened around production and payment. Revenues that could have stayed scattered among owners and contractors became something the polis watched and weighed. Silver turned into policy, and once it did, every ton underground carried political consequences. With this new attitude came a harder logic. If silver served the city, then interruptions stopped being mere business problems and became threats. The state's interest pushed for reliability, steady extraction, steady refining, steady delivery. That pressure travelled back down the chain, from officials to operators to overseers, and finally to the workers forced into the rock. The metal no longer represented wealth alone, it represented security and control. The silver from Laurion no longer looked like scattered profit. It looked like a chance to change Athens' future. Officials faced a choice. Divide the new money among citizens, or spend it on something that paid back over years. They chose the sea, not as an experiment, but as policy. Silver that came out of the ground now went into timber, pay, and planning. Athens began to treat ships as a permanent need, not a temporary project. A fleet demanded more than hulls. It demanded constant spending. Rowers needed wages, crews needed training, and ships needed repairs the moment they left port. The city used Laurion's windfall to keep that system running year after year. This made the decision irreversible. Once Athens depended on naval strength, it had to feed it. The mines provided that feed. The fleet then gave Athens a new kind of reach, fast, flexible, and hard for land powers to match. As the ships multiplied, Greek politics shifted around them. Athens gained leverage without taking territory first. It could escort trade, pressure rivals, and appear where it was not expected. Allies listened differently when a navy could arrive in days. Enemies calculated risk in new ways. Laurion's silver had turned into influence that travelled on water, and that influence began to reshape decisions across the Aegean because Athens no longer relied only on walls and armies, it relied on command of the sea. As Athens' reach expanded, so did its appetite for silver. The city needed coin for pay, supplies, and the steady costs of holding influence far beyond Attica. At Laurion, that demand translated into pressure. Owners pushed for more ore, faster, workdays lengthened. New shafts appeared beside old ones, not because the ground offered easy wealth, but because the state's needs kept rising. To meet those targets, the labour pool grew in the simplest way possible. More enslaved people got forced into the system. They got assigned where the rock still held value, and that often meant deeper. Underground, space tightened, air worsened, and mistakes became fatal. The deeper the workings went, the more the mines depended on bodies that could be replaced. That was the calculation. Hazards multiplied with depth. Shafts collapsed. Dust choked lungs. Heat and exhaustion slowed movement, and that slowing invited punishment. The drive for output did not stop to count injuries because the silver's destination stayed the same: Athens's public needs and private profits. By the time ore reached the surface, it carried an unseen cost. Imperial strength got financed underground, one broken worker after another. War put Athens under pressure, and pressure exposed weak points. Laurion, once a dependable engine of silver, turned into a risk the city could not easily manage. The mines sat far from the debates and speeches, out on exposed ground, tied to supply lines and constant supervision. When resources shifted to fighting, the system of control thinned. One disruption at Laurion did not stay local. It travelled straight into the city's finances. Instability changed what enslaved workers could attempt. In calmer times, escape looked impossible. Under strain, gaps appeared. Overseers could not watch every shaft, and owners could not replace losses as quickly. Some workers fled when patrols weakened. Others disappeared in the confusion of raids and shifting fronts. Each missing body meant less ore moved, less metal refined, fewer coins struck. The mines depended on coercion every day, and war interrupted that routine. The consequences hit Athens in ways people felt. Silver paid crews, repaired ships, and covered the steady costs of staying powerful. When Laurion faltered, that flow tightened, and the city had to choose what to fund and what to abandon. The vulnerability was not just geography, it was the labour system itself. Prosperity had rested on forced work kept stable by fear and order. Once fear failed, the whole machine shook. As Athens's power weakened, the silver engine that had fed it began to stall. Ship payments, wages and contracts tightened, and the mines felt it first. Fewer investors took risks underground. Repairs waited. New shafts stopped opening. Output fell, not in a single collapse, but in a steady narrowing of what seemed possible. The system that had once pushed deeper and harder now pulled back step by step. With less ore coming up, the whole chain broke in places. Work gangs shrank or disappeared. Washing and smelting ran below capacity, then paused when supplies failed to arrive. Some galleries turned into dead ends that no one maintained, and abandoned passages began to multiply. Above ground, the evidence piled up in a different way. Heaps of waste rock and dark slag from old smelts outlasted the people who made them. The slowdown did not erase what Laurion had been. It exposed it. When operations fractured, there was no clean ending for the labour that had sustained them. People who had been driven into the rock simply vanished from the record, replaced by silence and leftover scars in the ground. Abandoned tunnels stayed as proof of how far the work had gone. The quiet that followed still carried the weight of suffering. In the end, Laurion stayed behind as more than a spent industrial zone. It became a record people could still read. Researchers traced tunnels, measured spoil, and mapped the ruined systems that once moved ore, water, and smoke. Each scar in the ground pointed back to decisions made far away in the city. Silver had helped pay for public life and power. The cost had been buried with it. What made Laurion hard to sit with was the contrast it forced. Athens had been remembered for assemblies, votes, and the idea that citizens mattered. Yet the money that kept that system working had come from bodies treated as tools. The mines did not just produce metal, They produced a lesson in how freedom for some had depended on captivity for others. That connection refused to disappear. So Laurion became a moral argument as much as an archaeological site. It showed how quickly a promise could turn into a machine that demanded more labour, more risk, more lives. People studying the evidence did not have to guess at the outcome. The ground already held it. The wealth had been real, and so had the suffering. That uneasy pairing defined Laurion's legacy right up to the present.